Intro. Thanks to Wondrium for sponsoring this video. In the late 1920s, the psychoanalyst Carl Jung encountered a Buddhist text that radically shaped his own theories of the mind, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. In his commentary on the text, he called it the quintessence of Buddhist psychological criticism, calling its philosophy sublime and unparalleled. The Tibetan Book of the Dead went on to become one of the most widely recognized Buddhist texts in Europe and the United States. It inspired movies, novelists, and musicians like John Lennon of the Beatles. Lennon drew inspiration from the Tibetan Book of the Dead when he wrote the song Tomorrow Never Knows, also drawing inspiration from a psychedelic experience he had while on LSD. But what is this text? What does it say? And why did it become such a big deal to people like Jung? The Great Liberation. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is the Western name for the Bardo Thodol, meaning the Great Liberation by hearing in the intermediate states. That's a complicated title, but it tells us a lot about the text, so let's unpack it. The text is a funerary rite. It's intended to be read aloud to someone who's dying or recently dead. It's traditionally read by a lama, which, if you remember from our previous episode on Tibetan Buddhism, are religious teachers, the Tibetan equivalent to the Sanskrit word guru. The opening lines are a direct address to the dead. "O alas, alas, fortunate child of Buddha nature, do not be oppressed by the forces of ignorance and delusion, but rise up now with resolve and courage." By reciting the text, the Lama prepares the dead to enter the Bardo. Bardo refers to an intermediate state after death but before rebirth. This is the intermediate states part in the official title. But to understand what Bardo states are, you can compare it to a type of purgatory. It's a bewildering state of transformation and suspended reality. Technically, it's a state that happens entirely in the mind, not an actual physical place. The deceased, sometimes called the Bardo being, will be born there as a mental body in the shape of the body of their next incarnation. The word Bardo itself can also help us understand the concept. Bardo breaks down into the word bar, denoting movement or flowing, and do, which means a stepping stone or island. Thus, a Bardo is a mind island of stillness as you move from death to the next state of being. The goal during the Bardo state is to liberate the being from samsara, or the cycle of death and rebirth, hence the first part of the title, the Great Liberation. The consciousness of the deceased is in some sense still present in the corpse and can hear the text being read, as the Lama guides them through the bewildering experiences of the Bardos. I say bewildering because the Bardo being's own karma conjures all sorts of visions. Some of them are absolutely terrifying, and the Lama reading the text helps the Bardo being recognize what they're seeing during this intermediate state. The Bardos. So let's go through 3 of the Bardos that one passes through after death, as described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Though I'll note that there are a total of 6 Bardos mentioned in the text, we'll focus on the last 3. The first of these Bardos, known as the Bardo of the moment of death, begins as a person is physically dying. At the moment of death, the Bardo being enters into an experience of inner radiance, sometimes known as luminous mind, and can briefly experience a kind of ultimate truth of reality. If the Bardo being recognizes this state as absolute reality, they become enlightened and are liberated from rebirth. If they do not recognize it, which is more often the case, they enter the second Bardo called the Bardo of reality. It involves experiences and visions that can disorient the Bardo being if they don't have the Lama's help. The text stresses the importance of moving on, stating that it's not possible to remain here in this life, even if they were to try. Now that the Bardo being is reminded of these things, the Lama then warns them of what's to come. O child of Buddha nature, when your mind and body separate, the pure luminous apparitions of reality itself will arise, subtle and clear, radiant and dazzling, naturally bright and awesome. Do not fear them. Do not be terrified. Do not be awed. Whatever sounds, lights, or rays may arise, they cannot harm you, for you are beyond death now. Bright lights may not seem all that terrifying, but the Bardo being will soon be confronted by the peaceful and wrathful deities. What you're looking at is an 18th century Tibetan painting of these deities. The text instructs the Bardo being to visualize the assembled peaceful and wrathful deities as a mandala of deities within one's body. Mandala being a visual representation of a Buddha palace, specific pure lands, deities, or even the entire cosmos. They're often used as visual aids during meditation. The peaceful deities manifest before the Bardo being first. For many, this procession of deities will strike fear. For others, awe and fascination. The text attempts to steer the Bardo being away from these emotional highs and lows because to be liberated, they must recognize that these images are not separate from themselves. Instead, the deities are manifestations of their own mind. The entire mandala of peaceful deities will array itself in a rainbow of color. They will dazzle the Bardo being with many bright lights, while the text directs the Bardo being to achieve unity with them and not be distracted by the dull path back to rebirth. At that moment, do not withhold your compassion but draw us back from the path, which is the gateway to the deluded animal realms. But if the Bardo being has not identified with the peaceful deities and become Buddhas, they will then be approached by the assembly of wrathful blood-drinking deities. And these wrathful beings are as terrifying as they sound. They have many heads. They have sharp fangs. They will laugh at the Bardo being and make strange sounds. And they're depicted as being surrounded by flames with weapons in their hands. Although they're wrathful and appear as terrifying, blood-drinking demons, they are manifestations of pure nature. And the text explains that they shouldn't be feared. If the Bardo being recognizes either the peaceful or wrathful deities as manifestations of their own mind, the text says, "You will dissolve inseparably within the lights and Buddha bodies, and Buddhahood will be attained." So this is a second chance to achieve enlightenment and escape the cycle of rebirth. But many people will find this difficult, to say the least. If the Bardo being becomes afraid, they will not attain Buddhahood. And the deities will morph together. The peaceful deities will become Mahakala, known as the protector of the Dharma. And the wrathful deities will become Yama Dharmaraja, the lord of Buddhist hells.
As vast as the sky, brandishing in his hand the wooden slate documenting past actions, his mouth echoing with the cries of strike and kill. He is drinking brains, severing heads, and ripping out internal organs. The Bardo being will then faint from fear and wake up later, having failed to achieve liberation from samsara. The ritual context. From there, they enter the third Bardo of rebirth or existence. In this stage, the Bardo being's karma determines which realm they're born into. The realm of the gods, the jealous gods, humans, animals, hungry ghosts, or hells. The Bardo being will be presented with womb entrances, which they'll feel attracted to. Upon entering one entrance, conception occurs, and they are reborn. The transmigration process is complete, and the Bardo being enters into a different Bardo of birth. As we unpack this complex text, we should remember its ritual context. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is meant to be read aloud. It's an oral, performative text. And moreover, as one scholar says, it's meant to be read to the dead. Corpses are the intended audience. As you read the text, you'll notice so much of it is addressed specifically to, "O child of Buddha nature." And many of the stanzas are encouragements or instructions on how to navigate the wild visions of the Bardo states. The text reads very differently when you remind yourself of this oral nature of the text, especially the more terrifying parts of Yama drinking brains. History and origins. So where did the Tibetan Book of the Dead come from? Well, first of all, we should be clear that the name is a bit of a misnomer. Although it's called a book, it's actually a section of just 3 chapters from a larger text, a text called Peaceful and Wrathful Deities, a natural liberation through recognition of enlightened intention. The text is originally attributed to the 8th century tantric master Padmasambhava, who is one of the most revered figures in Tibetan Buddhism. As the tradition goes, he prophesied that his teachings would one day become corrupted. So to protect them, he began hiding texts around the Tibetan landscape to be revealed when the time was right, sometimes hiding the texts in a cave, lake, or on top of a mountain. But other times, hiding the texts in the heart and mind of a future disciple that would one day be revealed spontaneously, centuries later. These hidden teachings of Padmasambhava are called terma, translated as treasure. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is one part of one such terma text. The people who discover these treasures are called tertons, or treasure discoverers. Tertons are thought to be reincarnations of Padmasambhava's disciples. After giving a lecture, Padmasambhava would choose one of his disciples and assign the task of revealing that teaching in a future life. According to tradition, this is how the Tibetan Book of the Dead was discovered. In the 14th century, a 15-year-old boy named Karma Lingpa, the son of a tantric master, is said to have found several texts buried in a cave, including the entire collection of peaceful and wrathful deities, which, as I said, includes the section that we now call the Tibetan Book of the Dead.